The city had a pulse all its own that afternoon. The sun hung high and heavy, pouring golden heat down on the sidewalks until every step seemed to shimmer. Cars crawled through traffic with windows rolled down, radios competing for airspace, voices and laughter rising above the steady hum of engines. On a quiet corner, away from the chaos, sat a small, independent bookstore tucked between a cafe and an antique shop. Its windows were stacked with colorful paperbacks, and a handwritten chalkboard outside promised discounts on summer reads. Alana Washington loved this store. It was her little retreat in a world that always seemed to expect something from her. She was young, ambitious, smart, and determined to make her own way. Most people who saw her saw just another young black woman moving through the world. Very few knew that her last name carried weight, that her father was a man whose face was instantly recognizable across the globe. That was exactly how Alana liked it. She wanted to be her own person, not a shadow of someone else's fame. That day she wore a simple white blouse and jeans, her braids tied back neatly. She carried a tote bag on her shoulder, one hand holding her phone, the other sliding carefully over the book spines as she browsed. Classics, some thrillers, and one collection of essays that had caught her eye. When she finally stepped out into the sunlight, her arms were full, her smile soft and content. The street was busy, but calm. Families strolled past, sipping cold drinks. A man on a bike weaved lazily between cars. The air smelled faintly of roasted coffee beans from the cafe next door. Everything was normal, simple, safe, until it wasn't. The squeal of tires cut through the air like a blade. A police cruiser jerked to a stop just a few feet from the curb where Alana stood. The sudden noise made her jump, her books nearly slipping from her arms. A man across the street frowned, pulling out his phone instinctively, though he didn't know why. The driver's door slammed open. Out stepped an officer, tall and broad, his uniform pressed but his expression sharp with suspicion. His eyes locked on Alana as if she were the only person on the block. He adjusted his belt, puffed his chest, and barked, "Hey, what are you doing over here?" The question wasn't just a question, it was an accusation. Alana blinked, confused. She shifted the weight of the books in her arms. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice polite but wary. The officer stepped closer, his boots heavy on the pavement.
Yes.
"What you're doing in this part of town? You live around here?" His tone made it clear this wasn't curiosity. It was challenge. Alana straightened her shoulders. She had lived long enough to recognize the edge in his voice, the assumption laced in his words. "I was at the bookstore," she replied, gesturing to the shop behind her. "I just bought some books." The officer's eyes flicked to the store, then back to her. His jaw tightened. "You got a receipt for that?" Her brow furrowed. "A receipt? Of course I do." She adjusted her tote bag to free one hand, carefully tucking the books under her arms so she could pull out the slip of paper the cashier had handed her only minutes ago. She held it up for him to see, but he didn't look. Instead, he sneered, stepping closer still. "You looked nervous when I pulled up. What did you take, huh? Don't lie to me." Alana's chest tightened. She wasn't nervous because she'd done anything wrong. She was nervous because she knew where this kind of interaction could lead. She had seen enough stories, heard enough warnings from her parents, to understand that sometimes, no matter how calm or respectful you were, it wasn't enough. "I didn't take anything," she said firmly, though her voice trembled at the edges. "I bought these books. I just showed you the receipt." The officer didn't back down. He circled slightly, his hand twitching near his holster as if to remind everyone who was watching who held the power. By now, a few passersby had slowed, sensing the tension. Two women stood outside the cafe, whispering nervously. A man near the antique shop pulled out his phone and began recording quietly. "You're in a restricted zone," the cop suddenly declared, his voice louder now. "Loitering, possible theft. I'll need you to come with me." Lana shook her head, clutching her books tighter against her chest. "I haven't done anything wrong. I'm not loitering. I just came out of the store. You can ask the cashier." Her refusal seemed to spark something ugly in him. His face hardened, his posture stiffened, and in the next instant, he reached out and grabbed her wrist. His grip was iron, fingers digging into her skin. "Don't resist," he snapped, yanking her forward. The suddenness of it made her stumble, nearly dropping her books. Pain shot up her arm as his grip tightened. Instinctively, she tried to pull back. "Let me go! You're hurting me!" The crowd gasped, murmurs rising in alarm, but the officer wasn't listening. His eyes were cold, his voice sharp with arrogance. "Stop resisting, or you'll regret it." Lana twisted slightly, trying to free herself, and that was all it took. He wrenched her arm back violently, twisting her wrist at an unnatural angle. The sound came first, a sickening, sharp crack that echoed against the brick walls of the buildings. Then came her scream, piercing and raw, the kind of sound that made stomachs turn and hearts drop. Her knees buckled, books scattering across the sidewalk. She cradled her arm against her chest, tears streaming down her face as agony flooded every nerve. "You broke my arm," she cried, her voice shaking with shock and pain. The officer stood over her, his expression unreadable for a moment, then twisting into something worse smugness. He didn't apologize, didn't hesitate. Instead, he pulled out his handcuffs. "You're under arrest," he barked, as though her pain was irrelevant, as though he hadn't just brutalized her in broad daylight. He grabbed her again, snapping the cuffs onto her wrists, forcing her broken arm into position, despite her cries. She nearly fainted from the pain, her vision swimming, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The onlookers couldn't stay silent anymore. "That's assault," someone shouted. "She didn't do anything," another voice added. Phones were out. Everywhere now, angles capturing the moment, recording not just the violence but the arrogance that followed. The officer shoved Alana toward the squad car, ignoring the voices, ignoring her pleas. To him, this was routine. Just another day, another body to control. Another example of his authority stamped on the streets. He didn't notice the way the videos were already being uploaded. He didn't see the comments flooding in real time, people identifying him, demanding accountability. He didn't hear the whispers in the crowd as someone gasped, "That's Denzel Washington's daughter. That's his daughter." Because in his arrogance, in his blind prejudice, he thought she was powerless. He didn't realize he had just set a fire he couldn't put out. The air outside the bookstore was electric, heavy with disbelief and outrage. People clustered in knots along the sidewalk, their conversations low but charged, like sparks hopping between live wires. The officer had shoved Alana into the back of his cruiser and slammed the door shut with a clang that echoed, final and brutal. She sat inside, cradling her arm to her chest, her face pale from the pain. From outside, the glass window made her look like she was trapped in a cage, her lips moving soundlessly, her breath shallow. Phones were everywhere. A young man with curly hair and wide eyes stood on the curb, his phone raised high as he live-streamed. "Y'all see this?" he said breathlessly, his voice trembling with anger. He just broke her arm. For what?
Ow.
For walking out a bookstore with books? "Man, nah, we're not letting this slide." His feed exploded in real time. He started with 20 viewers, then hundreds, then thousands. Comments streamed across his screen. "What the hell? Get her name. Keep recording. Don't let them cover this up." On the other side of the street, a woman uploaded her clip to Twitter. It showed the officer yanking Alana's arm, her books tumbling onto the concrete, her desperate eye didn't do anything, followed by the sharp, unmistakable crack. The woman's caption was raw, unfiltered. "He broke her arm. For nothing. Share this." The post lit up like wildfire. Retweets shot into the thousands, then tens of thousands, each one multiplying. The outrage dot inside the cruiser. Alana's thoughts spiraled through the haze of pain. Her arm throbbed, every heartbeat a fresh knife slicing through bone and nerve. She tried to focus, to steady herself, but the officer's smug expression outside the window made it harder. He leaned against the hood, scrolling casually through, his phone acting as though he hadn't just shattered her body and dignity in front of an entire crowd. His calmness was its own kind of violence. He didn't fear consequences because, to him, there never were any. "You'll regret this," she whispered through clenched teeth, though he couldn't hear her. It wasn't a threat. It was a truth. The car finally pulled into the precinct. She stumbled out under his grip, her face ashen. A desk sergeant at the front counter frowned immediately. "She's hurt," he said, His voice carried the weary weight of someone who had seen too much. She resisted, the officer replied coolly. Hurt herself in the process. The sergeant looked from the girl's mangled arm to the officer's stone face. He wanted to argue, but the hierarchy bound his tongue. He scribbled notes, logged the arrest, and muttered, "Medic." A rookie hustled over, wrapping Alana's arm in a makeshift sling. The medic's eyes flickered with sympathy, but not a word of comfort passed his lips. He couldn't risk crossing the line. Meanwhile, outside the precinct, the storm was brewing. Within an hour, the hashtag Justice for Alana trended on Twitter. Instagram Reels replayed the crack of her arm on loop, voices narrating their disbelief. TikTok was filled with side-by-side commentary, people freezing the exact moment of the injury. Zooming in on her anguished face, replaying the officers, sneering, "Stop resisting." But the real tidal wave hit when a man posted a thread on Twitter. "I know that girl. That's Alana Washington, Denzel Washington's daughter. I've known her since she was a kid. Y'all think this is just some random girl they messed with? The wrong one." He attached photos, one from the video, one from a red carpet event years back. The resemblance was undeniable. The internet detonated. "You're telling me that cop broke Denzel Washington's daughter's arm? Oh, he's done. He's so done. Forget administrative leave. That man's about to wish he never woke up today." Within hours, the story leapt from social media to every major outlet. CNN's breaking news banner read, "Actress's daughter injured in violent arrest." NBC and ABC scrambled to verify, but by the evening the confirmation was solid. The woman in the viral video was indeed Denzel Washington's daughter, Alana. The narrative shifted instantly. It wasn't just another tragic case of police brutality, though. It was that. To it was a national scandal with Hollywood at its center. Clips of Denzel and past interviews about justice and dignity were dug up and replayed. Alongside footage of his daughter screaming on the pavement, commentators shook their heads at the irony. The daughter of a man who embodied strength and morality on screen had been brutalized in real life by someone sworn to protect. Protest groups mobilized overnight. Flyers spread across group chats. And social media feeds, "Rally at the precinct, 9 a.m.
Ow.
Churches began organizing vigils. One pastor tweeted, "We must stand for Alana Washington like we would for any of our daughters." Celebrities amplified the message. A basketball star tweeted, "Unacceptable, praying for Alana and her family. Accountability now." A Grammy-winning singer posted a black square with the words, "She was buying books." Within minutes, her post had 1 million likes. At the police department, phone lines melted under the weight of furious calls. City officials were cornered by reporters demanding answers. Council members issued statements condemning excessive force. The mayor's office released a carefully worded note. "We are monitoring the situation closely." The most important pressure came from the public itself. People didn't just want an internal investigation. They wanted heads to roll. Inside her holding cell, Alana sat with her back against the wall, cradling her arm in the sling. The pain was constant, but what kept her strong was memory, her father's voice reminding her of resilience. Her mother's tenderness, when the world felt cruel. She thought of every lesson drilled into her, to never let anyone steal her dignity, no matter how hard they tried. The officer, meanwhile, strutted through the precinct with false bravado. He bragged quietly to a colleague, "It's nothing." She pled, like they all do. End of story. His arrogance was a shield against reality, shield cracking by the second. He had no idea his name was already plastered across the internet, trending beside hers. His badge number was circulating. Like wildfire, his protesters were making signs with his face on them. By midnight, memes and hashtags calling for his resignation filled every corner of the digital world. That evening, the police chief was forced to address the press. Under the glare of cameras, he announced, "The department has launched an internal investigation. The officer involved has been placed on administrative leave." His words were clipped, his expression tight. The reporters pounced. "Why was she arrested at all?" one demanded. "Why did he use that much force?" Another shouted. "Did the officer know she was Alana Washington?" The chief dodged, deflected, repeated phrases like pending investigation and review board. But he knew deep down that none of it mattered anymore. The story had run far beyond his control. Back in her cell, Alana closed her eyes and exhaled slowly. She could almost hear the chants outside, because by then, protesters had already gathered at the precinct gates, candles glowing in the dark. They held signs, books, not bruises. Her arm was broken, but the system is what's fractured. The sound of their voices seeped into the building, muffled but steady. For the first time since the crack of bone on pavement, Alana felt a flicker of relief. She wasn't alone. And across the city, across the nation, millions of strangers now knew her story, and they weren't about to let it go. The precinct had never been so tense. By the time night fell, the chants outside were impossible to ignore. Hundreds of people stood shoulder to shoulder at the gates, their candles flickering against handmade signs. The words "Justice for Alana" glowed on poster boards. Spray-painted banners, even across the back of a teenager's jean jacket. Reporters gathered in tight circles, their vans parked along the street, floodlights slicing the darkness as camera crews narrated the unfolding storm. Inside, the officers pretended to go about their work, but no one could escape the pounding. Rhythm of the chants seeping through the walls. It was a drumbeat of defiance, a reminder that the world was watching. Alana sat on the cold bench in her holding cell, her arm throbbing in the sling the medic had tied around her. She kept her eyes closed, drawing on the reservoir of patience she'd been taught all her life. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, a voice that always carried calm, even in storms. Never lose yourself to their anger. Truth wins in the end. And then the room shifted. It started with a murmur, then a ripple that swept through the precinct like a gust of wind. Officers at their desks looked up, the front doors opened, and in walked Denzel Washington. The air stilled instantly. He wasn't in a movie costume, wasn't standing under studio lights, yet his presence filled the building with a gravity that couldn't be ignored. He wore a simple black jacket, dark jeans, and his face was set with a quiet fury that made people avert their eyes. Behind him trailed two attorneys in tailored suits and a family friend, his expression equally grim. Every step Denzel took echoed against the tile floor. Officers shifted uneasily in their chairs, whispering to one another. The desk sergeant, who had logged Alana's arrest hours earlier, stood straighter without even thinking about it. The officer who had broken, Alana's arm, Officer Grant, was leaning against a filing cabinet, smirking as though the protests outside were just background noise. When he saw who had entered, the smirk faltered. He tried to recover, puffing his chest, but his swagger looked hollow under Denzel's gaze. "Where's my daughter?" Denzel's voice was low, steady, but it carried across the room like thunder. The sergeant swallowed hard.
"Mr. Washington?"
"She's in holding. Madiq saw her. Take me to her," Denzel interrupted. There was no shout, no raised volume, just an authority that allowed no room for denial. Keys jingled nervously as the sergeant led him down the corridor. Officers watched from their desks, silent, their screens glowing with the very news stories they had tried to avoid all evening. When Denzel reached the cell, Alana looked up, her eyes glassy from exhaustion and pain. For the first time that day, her composure cracked. "Dad?" she whispered. The door swung open, and he was at her side, carefully kneeling to avoid jostling her arm. He took her uninjured hand in both of his, pressing his forehead to hers for a long moment. No cameras here, no audience, just father and daughter, anchored together against the storm. "I've got you," he murmured. "You're safe now." Her tears spilled freely then, silent but heavy. All the strength she had carried for hours finally found release. The attorneys moved swiftly, presenting paperwork citing the unlawful nature of the arrest, the excessive use of force, and the clear violation of her rights. Within minutes, the sergeant unlocked the cuffs, his hands shaking as he avoided meeting Alana's eyes. She flexed her free wrist gingerly, wincing at the pressure, but she stood tall, leaning lightly into her father's side. And then Denzel turned. Officer Grant stood near the end of the hall, arms crossed, trying to mask his unease. Denzel's eyes locked onto him, and for a moment the entire precinct held its breath. "You," Denzel said, his tone like steel. Grant straightened, forcing a laugh. "Sir, I was just doing my job." She resisted arrest. "You broke my daughter's arm." Denzel cut him off, each word sharp enough to cut glass. "She was buying books." "And you decided to make her a criminal?" "What?" Grant bristled. No," Denzel said firmly, stepping closer, his voice rising just enough for every ear in the building to hear. "You thought you had power, but what you showed was cowardice. Real power isn't in breaking someone smaller than you. Real power is restraint. Real power is knowing when to protect instead of destroy. You failed. And now everyone knows it." The silence that followed was suffocating. Grant's jaw clenched, but his bravado had evaporated. He glanced around, searching for backup from his colleagues, but found none. Every officer's eyes were on the floor, unwilling to defend him. The chief arrived moments later, summoned by the attorneys. His expression was pinched, his forehead slick with sweat. He tried to placate the crowd inside, muttering about procedures and ongoing investigations, but the attorneys shredded his excuses, citing legal precedent, demanding immediate accountability. And then the doors burst open again, this time with a swarm of reporters. The protests outside had swelled to thousands, and the crowd had pushed so hard for answers that the precinct had been forced to let the media in. Cameras whirred, microphones thrust forward, questions shouted over one another. Alana, her arm in its sling, stood beside her father as the flashbulbs lit up the room. She looked pale, tired, but unbroken. Denzel wrapped an arm protectively around her shoulder. One reporter's voice pierced the chaos. "Mr. Washington, what do you want to say tonight?" Denzel looked directly into the cameras, his voice calm, but burning with conviction. "My daughter was assaulted. Her arm was broken by someone sworn to protect her. This is not just about hurts, about every person who has been silenced, bruised, or broken by abuse of power. Enough is enough. We are demanding justice, not just for Alana, but for everyone who has ever suffered in silence." The room erupted in flashes and shouts. Officer Grant tried to slip away quietly, but the chief stopped him cold. The weight of the cameras, the pressure from the attorneys, the fury of the crowd outside, it all converged in that moment. Internal affairs officer approached, pulling out a pair of cuffs. The chief nodded grimly. Grant's eyes widened. "Wait, what?" "You can't." The click of metal around his wrists silenced him. The cameras caught it all. The man who had strutted with arrogance now stumbling, red-faced as he was led out of the precinct in handcuffs. The chants outside grew louder, thunderous, echoing against the walls. Justice for Alana. Justice for Alana. The sight electrified the crowd. Protesters cheered, reporters narrated live. Social media feeds exploded with clips of the officer being arrested in the very place he had once felt untouchable. Alana leaned into her father, her face softening for the first time that day. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was the spark that had lit a fire far bigger than herself in the days that followed. The story consumed the nation. Editorials condemned the culture of impunity in policing. Celebrities spoke out, not only because it was Denzel's daughter, but because the footage laid bare the cruelty countless others had faced unseen. Marches filled city streets. Lawmakers promised reforms. But for Alana, the most important moment came privately. At home, arms still in a cast, she sat with her father on the porch as the sun set. He sipped tea, his gaze thoughtful. "You handled yourself with more courage than most people ever could," he told her softly. She shook her head. "I broke down, Dad. I felt so powerless." He turned to her, his eyes steady, powerless. "Alana, you faced him with dignity. You didn't let it. His hate changed who you are. And because of that, the world saw the truth. That's not weakness. That's strength." She smiled faintly, leaning her head against his shoulder. For the first time in days, the pain seemed lighter, and somewhere across town, Officer Grant sat in his own cell, stripped of his badge, his arrogance replaced with silence. He had thought he was untouchable. He had thought the girl on the sidewalk was just another nobody. But now he knew the truth. The consequences he had outrun for years had finally caught up to him. And they weren't letting go. The story ended. Not with Alana broken, but with her stronger. Her voice amplified. Her dignity intact. And as her father had said, it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every life scarred by arrogance, masquerading as authority. That night, as the chant still echoed faintly in the city, Alana closed her eyes and let herself rest. Justice was only beginning, but for once, she knew it was within reach.